The jam wouldn't spread, and neither would the truth. Welcome to Faded Echoes. I am your host, Ombra. Tell me where you're listening from. Seeing this community grow is incredible. Your comments always make my day. Let's begin. Breakfast at the Brownstone is usually an orderly affair. Wolfe takes his in the dining room at 9 sharp. I take mine a few minutes earlier to avoid hearing him grumble about the temperature of the saucer or the cut of the bread. Fritz brings in the trays like a surgeon carrying organs, and the world ticks along. That morning, though, Fritz's eyebrows were doing calisthenics before he'd even set down my coffee. "There is," he began, then stopped because the doorbell rang. Now, when the Brownstone's front bell chimes before noon, it's rarely a cause for celebration. It means either a salesman, a client in distress, or Inspector Kramer with a cigar and indigestion. I told Fritz to hold his horses and went to the door. The woman standing on the stoop looked like she had borrowed her hat from a museum exhibit. Wide brim, 3 fake cherries pinned on the side. She was young, too young for that hat, and nervous in a way that suggested she had practiced not being nervous. She clutched a small parcel wrapped in brown paper, and the smell of strawberries drifted out like a bribe. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, "must see this." At once I asked her name, which she gave as Miss Clara Tuttle, and then I made the mistake of asking what this was. She tore off the paper with the desperation of a magician proving his trick real, revealing a jar of jam. Ordinary jar, red checkered lid, contents a promising ruby color. She thrust it at me like it was dynamite. "It won't spread," she whispered. "Not at all." Now I've heard some strange opening lines from prospective clients. My husband is missing. My employer is blackmailing me. My cousin tried to poison me. But "it won't spread" was a new entry for the records. I told her so, but she only pressed the jar harder into my hand. This was meant to be a gift. Instead, it's a message. Someone tampered with it. You must let me speak to him. "Mr. Wolfe," I sized her up. She didn't have the look of someone crazy enough to make jam sabotage her full-time hobby. There was fear in her eyes, the kind that isn't manufactured. And there was Wolfe behind me in the dining room, who by now had paused mid-bite and was making the sound of a man forced to witness the world intrude on his breakfast routine. "Archie," he called, the vowels heavy with irritation. "Who is it?" "Jam delivery," I said, with attitude. Clara Tuttle followed me inside before Wolfe could object, her heels clicking across the rug like gunshots. Fritz bristled. Wolfe leaned back in his chair, lips compressed, already calculating the calories this interruption would cost him. "Mr. Wolfe," Clara said breathlessly, setting the jar on the table as though it were Exhibit A. "Someone is trying to warn me or silence me. I don't know which, but this jam, it's been altered. No matter how you try, the knife won't move it. It clings, immovable. Like concrete." Wolfe glared at the jar as though it had committed an unspeakable offense against the Republic. "Miss Tuttle," he said, in that slow bass that could butter toast without a knife, "you have interrupted my meal to present a culinary defect." "Explain," she swallowed. "I work as secretary to Mr. Horace Vale. Perhaps you've heard of him." Wolfe's eyebrows flickered. The tiniest recognition. I knew the name too. Vale was a publishing magnate who had made enemies faster than he made bestsellers. Clara went on. "This jar was left on my desk yesterday. No note, just this. At first I thought it a gift, but when I tried to open it this morning, well, it was wrong. Not spoiled, deliberately tampered with. And Mr. Vale, he's been receiving threats, anonymous, coded. I believe this is another message." Wolfe's nostrils flared as though the strawberries offended him more than the threats. He turned his gaze to me. "Archie." Remove the lid, I twisted it off. The scent was rich, inviting. But when I put the knife in, it stopped halfway, frozen like Excalibur in stone. I tried again. The jam clung to the knife as if fused. I pulled harder, and the blade bent without progress. It wasn't jam. It was lacquer. Curious, Wolfe murmured. Not culinary. Symbolic. I looked at him. He was leaning back, eyes closed, fingertips pressed together. The hat, the parcel, the jar, he had already filed them in some drawer of his brain under a label none of us would see for hours. Miss Tuttle clasped her hands. Please, Mr. Wolfe. If this is a warning, then Mr. Vale may be in danger. He won't listen to me. He thinks I exaggerate, but I know. Someone wants to stop him, and they mean to use me to do it. She was either telling the truth or she deserved an Oscar. Wolfe opened his eyes and regarded her with that glacier stare of his. Miss Tuttle, I have no interest in confections, nor in publishing magnates with enemies. However, he paused, glanced at the jam as though it had personally challenged his dignity. A jar that refuses to spread is an affront to order, and that I will not abide. That was as close as Wolfe came to fireworks before lunch. For me, it meant the day had just gotten longer. Fritz ferried Miss Tuttle to the office as if she were a fragile cake he hadn't ordered. And I brought the jar. Wolfe had retreated from the dining room with the kind of dignity a man keeps for funerals and tax audits. He settled behind his desk, tilted his head back and closed his eyes. That was not a nap. That was the "don't waste my oxygen" signal. State your facts, he said, chronologically. Without rhetoric, Miss Tuttle perched on the red leather chair like it might object. Her hands were neat. Her panic was not. 3 weeks ago, she began, Mr. Vale announced a new campaign for our autumn list. He called it Make It Spread. 2-page spreads for the papers, influencer spreads on social media, bookstore window spreads. He liked the word. He said it felt muscular. Pfui, Wolfe said without opening his eyes. The day after, she went on, a note appeared in his inbox. Just a strip of paper, cut from a proof with letters pasted like a child's ransom. Don't let his word spread. Another said, seal them. Then last Friday, someone slipped a proof of our lead title back onto my desk, with its edges glued shut. The foredge, where you turn the pages, it was varnished. You couldn't open the book without slitting it. I glanced at the jar. And today, we're promoted to breakfast garnish. I thought at first it was a joke, she said. But this, it isn't jam. It's a demonstration. Wolfe opened his eyes. He didn't look at her. He looked at the jar. Where, he asked, would one varnish 1,000 foredges without detection? In the bindery, she said, or during the spray coating at the plant. But that would require access and timing. We use Grafton Bixler for the big runs. Names, Wolfe said. Of those with motive and opportunity. She hesitated, glanced at me, then back at him. Mr. Vale's enemies are a sort of anthology. There's Lydia Sloane, our editorial director. Brilliant, proud. She and Mr. Vale fought last month over cancelling a debut novelist. There's Eldon Papet, our CFO, who hates the ad budget. Our union rep, Martin Kegel, is angry over overtime at the plant. Vera Dane, an author, believes Mr. Vale buried her last book to favor someone else, and Denton Kreider, who runs Belladonna Press, offered to poach me last year. He'd love to watch Mr. Vale fall on a fountain pen. There it was, a tasteful sampler for a later moment when I'd have to go knock on doors and see who slammed them. Wolfe turned the jar slowly, as if the label might confess. He lifted the lid again, brought the mouth to his nose, and sniffed. He does that with wine and trouble. Shellac, he said. Sugar carries the scent. Someone with a sense of humor and a tincture of knowledge. And a key, I added. You don't varnish proofs in the lobby. Before Wolfe could reply, the doorbell chimed again. Fritz's footsteps went down the hallway, and a new voice spilled in, male, resonant, and carrying the perfume of money burned recently. Horace Vale did not so much enter a room as colonize it. He came through my door in a camel coat he didn't need in June and a smile that asked what the world had done for him lately. He noticed Clara, then the jar, then Wolfe. The smile stayed on, but it had to work for a living. "Ah," he said, "so you brought the props." "Mr. Vale," Clara said, standing. She looked like someone bracing for a standing ovation that might be a firing squad. "I told you," Vale said, never taking his eyes off Wolfe, "to bring nothing here. I'm not paying $15,000 for a gourmet to sniff jam." "You're not paying anything," Wolfe said, his tone soft as a duvet and twice as smothering. "Not yet." "Sit or don't," Vale sat, because men like that always do when a bigger stillness occupies the room. He flicked a glance at me and decided I was staff, which was a common mistake and sometimes useful. "If Miss Tuttle has troubled you," Vale said, "I'll remove her at once. She is impressionable. There have been vexations at the office. We are a publisher. Vexation is our ink." "Your vexations include threats," I said, "and a book with its forehead shellacked shut, and that I tapped the jar. A pun with a budget." Vale's eyes flinched, then recovered. "A prank. We are targets for pranks. We sell outrage by the yard, pranks that require entry to a bindery line," Wolfe said, "and a knowledge of production, and a fondness for metaphor. Have you been pranked before, Mr. Vale?" He didn't answer that. He folded one leg over the other and inspected his shoe as if it might supply a quote. "In 3 days," he said, "we launch our autumn anchor, a novel called The Quiet Ransom. We have front-of-book 2-page spreads in the Times and the Post. We have an architectural window at Strand. We have 7 figures in paper committed. Someone made paste-ups that say, 'Your Sunday spread won't spread,' and slipped them into envelopes with our Sunday ad buys. Our marketing people laughed. I did not. There was the adverb we needed. Sunday." Wolfe shifted an inch, which in his case is a thesis. "The jar, the glued proof, the pasted notes," he said. 3 expressions of a single conceit, to impede dissemination. Someone intends to either humiliate you at a launch or extract something before you can prevent it. You came here to prevent humiliation at a discount. You assume I came," Vale said. "I came because my secretary cannot follow instructions." Clara's neck colored. She kept still. If she was intimidated, she'd learned to be neat about it. "You will leave the jar," Wolfe said. Vale's head turned. "I will do nothing of the sort." It was left at my office. "It is now in mine," Wolfe said, "by intermediation. Nothing that intrudes here departs without my leave. Ask Inspector Kramer." That name put a burr under Vale's silk. He spread his hands. "Very well. Keep your jam. Tell me your price." $2,000 as a retainer," Wolfe said, "credited against time at my customary rate, plus expenses. If the matter is concluded before lunch tomorrow, $1,000, you will conclude it before lunch." Vale's grin came back to sniff for leverage. "I will conclude nothing," Wolfe said. "I will begin, Archie." I took that as a cue, which it was. "Do you want Saul?" I asked. "After lunch," he said. "First, call Grafton Bixler. Secure the names of those with access to finishing and spray. Then speak with Miss Sloane, privately, and request specimens of the threatening notes. Take the jar to Dr. Vollmer for verification of a composition. It is shellac or a resin. I want a formula, not a guess. At 11, remind me to attend the orchids Vale stood." "You're really going to sit upstairs and sniff flowers while I bleed money?" "Sir," Wolfe said, "I'm going to inspect the orchids because they are living things that reward care, and because no act of yours or of your enemies will improve by my hovering over it. If you find that intolerable, you may go to the police and explain your puns." He went to the door, then paused. If any of my staff are contacted, he said, they will refer you to me. We have a chain of command. I smiled at him. We prefer chains when they're attached to the people who forged them. After he left, the air lightened by a few pounds per square inch. Clara stayed seated, looking at the jar like it might apologize. Wolfe closed his eyes again. Miss Tuttle, he said, you will return to your desk and do nothing inventive. You will not warn, confide, or accuse. You will collect for Mr. Goodwin copies of the pasted threats, logs of after-hours entries, and Mr. Vale's launch calendar. If anyone asks where you were, tell them you went out for cherries for your hat. Her mouth twitched. It was the first time she'd almost smiled in our company. Yes, Mr. Wolfe. Fritz, Wolfe called, and Fritz, who always appears at the second syllable when it's an emergency, presented himself. The safe, Wolfe said, indicating the jar. I locked the jar beside a revolver that never gets used and a stack of correspondence that always does. When I turned back, Wolfe was regarding me. You see it, he said. I see a man who made spread his gospel and invited a prankster to write the liturgy, I said. And I see a production line where a little resin in the wrong sprayer ruins a lot of Sundays. Pfui, he said. You see the varnish. See the hand. The varnish does not choose a day. He was right as usual. The day would be chosen by someone who knew when the presses ran, when the windows dressed, when the ads dropped. That was a person with a calendar and a key. I checked my watch. It was going to be one of those days that ate the rest of the week. Grafton Bixler first? I asked. First, he said. And Archie? Yes. Do not eat anything resembling jam. I left the jar where Wolfe wanted it, cloistered, and took the road. Midtown does something to a man before lunch. It convinces him he can finish 3 errands and still have time to regret 2 of them. I flagged a cab and rang Grafton Bixler from the back seat. The operator patched me to a plant manager named Manwaring, who sounded like a man who keeps his shirt starched and his swear words private. We don't use shellac, he said after I introduced myself and dropped Wolfe's name like a passport. Not since the 80s. Our coaters run aqueous acrylic, UV cured. Food safe when it needs to be. Whatever you're smelling, it wasn't ours. Your 4 edges ever get a beauty treatment? I asked. We paint them gold if the customer pays and the book pretends to be a hymnal. Otherwise, no. The only time a 4 edge gets sprayed here is if somebody misses the line. Last Friday, I said. Any misses? He paused long enough to read a log. We had a line stop on finishing 2 at 22:42. Reset in 8 minutes. Reason code said a nozzle purge. Night lead signed it, Olander. He's competent, too competent to varnish a novel. Shut, I need a list of anyone with access to the spray booths and the purge solvents. And badge taps for after hours last Thursday and Friday. You think we got a saboteur? I think somebody got cute with a metaphor. If they used your house, I'd like to know whether they also borrowed your key. His breath did a little nose laugh. I'll email logs. Names you'll want. Ruth Gonzalez. Finishing supervisor. Ben Olander. Night lead. Nisha Patel. QA. Wally Kurtz. Maintenance. And any third-party techs. We had a contractor walk the booths last week. Label Amphicoat. Amphicoat. Catalyst vendor. They've got a rep who likes to talk about mouthfeel like he's presenting at a bakery. Also, your union rep Kegel had 2 stewards on site for OT grievances. If you want to stir that pot, wear gloves. Would your logs tell me if a supervisor login got used while its owner was sunning in Maui? It did tell me it got used, he said. We're not the CIA. Close enough. Send what you've got. One more thing. If I wanted to dissolve shellac fast, strictly theoretical. Denatured alcohol, he said, no hesitation. But don't try it on a 20,000 run unless you enjoy explaining to finance why Sunday smells like a bar. I gave him a destination for the email, and promised not to visit unannounced with a camera crew. Then I had the cab drop me at Vale House, which is what they call the block of offices where people turn books into influence and invoices. Clara had greased passage with a temporary badge. I went past a foyer populated by hardcovers pretending to be better company than they are, and found Lydia Sloane's office by the sound of someone telling a writer the truth in small doses. She sent the caller to a soothing place and motioned me in. She wore grey and the expression of a woman who has learned to park her opinions where the bosses can't tow them. "You're Goodwin," she said. It wasn't a question. Mr. Vale told me to cooperate completely or to consider my calendar open. "You'll get the first option." "Appreciated," I said. "I need the pasted notes, scans if you've got them, the schedule for the quiet ransoms runs, and a list of who touches proofs between here and the plant." She slid a folder toward me that had been waiting for this conversation. Either she was efficient or she'd anticipated that we'd show up the minute a jar played prima donna. "3 notes," she said. 2 delivered to Mr. Vale's inbox. 1 mailed to my home. Cut from laser proofs, coated stock, the same we use for 2-page ads. Whoever did it knows our paper. The glue is craft grade. No fingerprints except mine and the mailman's sense of humor. I looked at the notes. The letters weren't random. They respected Kerning with a love that's either professional or pathological. "Do you like puns, Miss R. Sloane?" "I like them in crossword grids, not as campaign strategy," she said. "If this is Eldon Pape's idea of a budget argument, he's about to discover how quickly a book can spread bad press. If it's Vera Dane, she wouldn't bother with glue. She has social media and an adjective problem." "Tell me about her." "Brilliant in the first half, belligerent in the second. She believes the company buried her last novel, which is nearly true if you define burial as not spending $1 million to make the internet like you. She thinks Mr. Vale did it to goose a male author's numbers. She's said worse things than that, but not where legal can afford to hear. And Denton Crider, Belladonna's princeling, collects grudges in mint condition, offered me a job once so he could say he'd turned me down. He'd sabotage a campaign if he could make it look like our incompetence, but he prefers other people to do the wet work. She pushed a second folder over. Launch schedule. Window installs Friday afternoon. Sunday spreads booked. Files to newspaper Friday 5 p.m. "If someone wants a public failure," she said, tapping the schedule, "they'll hit the Strand window or the Sunday ads. The most eyes for the least effort and Kegel. Union representative. Smart, theatrical. He thinks a live-streamed picket is better than a quiet concession. He's angling for a headline to leverage an arbitration. If someone glued our foredges, he'd rather chant about it than cause it. He knows the line stops cost his members OT. The door opened without a knock, because some people think drama is a key card. Vera Dane entered like a storm rehearsed to look accidental. She was tall, hair in a braid, eyes that had learned to aim. She saw me, then Lydia, and chose me because she hadn't yelled at me yet. "You work for Vale," she said. "I work for a man who sits in a chair and solves problems," I said. "Vale is a problem." "He's a symmetry," she said. "You take men who used to read, give them spreadsheets and the belief that a book is a weapon if you swing it at the right demographic. Then you tell women to be grateful for the bruises. If someone glued his Sunday spreads shut, I'll read it out loud." "Not in my office," Lydia said, calm as a fire door. "We're cooperating with an investigation." "I've read your investigations," Vera said. "They end with a man receiving an award for discovering that water is wet." She pivoted to me. "Tell your detective this. Horace Vale doesn't fear sabotage. He fears silence. If he thought a jar could silence him, he'd buy the factory." She left with the kind of exit that makes interns Google her quotes for the pitch deck. Lydia watched the door close and breathed like a human who doesn't get to do it often. "You see our circle," she said. "Some days I call it a carousel." I see a lot of people who prefer metaphors to fingerprints, I said, standing. If you get another note, call me. If anyone asks what I wanted, tell them I asked about adjectives. I collected scans, a copy of the schedule, and 3 transparent sleeves with the pasted notes. In the lobby, Eldon Papp intercepted me by the espresso machine like a man who arranges his ambushes where caffeine can help. He was spare, rimless glasses, voice made to soothe frightened money. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "I understand you are assisting Mr. Vale in a matter that is sensitive. If your employer believes our ad buys will be compromised, we will adjust." Quietly. "We do not require a circus." "You've already got a tent," I said. "We're just measuring the ring." "If you point that ring at our plant workers," he said, "you'll be wasting ink. Grievances don't glue proofs. Ego does. If you would like examples, I can email you 6 copy Mr. Vale," I said, and left before he could offer me a chart. Back in the cab, my phone buzzed. Manwaring had delivered badge taps for finishing 2, showed a supervisor login used twice after midnight, Ruth Gonzalez's credentials, while Ruth herself, according to PTO, was at home nursing a kid with strep. The purge nozzle had been opened for 8 minutes. A contractor badge labeled AMP-HI 42 had wandered in and out of the cage without a corresponding work order. And there was a note from a QA tech, Patel, flagging a sweet odor around the booths and getting told to stop romanticizing solvents. I sent the logs to Wolfe and added a note. Sweet smell, plus off hours, plus borrowed login. Our comedian rehearsed. Then I told the cab to swing me back to the brownstone. When work chooses to be tidy, it's usually because it's about to make a mess. Fritz let me in with raised eyebrows that asked if I'd found sin in a spray booth. I went to the office. The safe was where I'd left it. Wolfe was in his chair, eyes closed, fingers together. The orchids had been tended and forgiven. I put the folders on his desk blotter and waited. "Report," he said, not opening his eyes. I gave it to him clean. When I finished, he opened one eye. "Amphicoat," he said, a lovely word. "Amphibious, ambivalent, ambidextrous." "Find me the rep after Vollmer," I asked. "After lunch," he said. "First Dr. Vollmer, bring him the jar. And Archie." "Yes?" "If anyone attempts to spread alarm while you're carrying it, spill nothing." The jam jar traveled with me like an unwelcome baby. I carried it in a brown bag Fritz had handed over with the solemnity of a baptism. Dr. Vollmer's office was 4 blocks east, past a florist and a bakery that made me wish the jar had lived up to its label. Vollmer greeted me with his usual combination of briskness and resignation, the kind of man who'd seen too many curiosities paraded under his microscope. "You've brought me what?" he asked, tugging his glasses higher. "Breakfast that bit back," I said, setting the bag on his counter. He drew the jar out, twisted the lid, and took a long, surgical sniff. His eyebrows leapt like startled birds. "Shellac," he said at once. "And something else." Resinous, but softened. You can smell the alcohol base. Whoever mixed this didn't just pour shellac in. They cut it, spread it, let it settle. "It won't spread," I said. "That's the gag." He peered at the surface with a magnifier. "Not just shellac. There's a pigment here. Carmine or a synthetic equivalent. Food dye. The mixer wanted it to look appetizing. On purpose. They wanted someone to try to spread it and fail. Symbolic, I asked him to make it more than a guess. He nodded, scraped a sample, and promised a full chemical profile by morning. "But Archie," he said, "this isn't amateur. Whoever did this knows coating agents. This is bench-level work, not the kitchen hobby of a crank. More like a technician demonstrating contempt that fit neatly with Manwaring's logs. A contractor, an access badge, a night with solvents. I left Volmer with the jar and a warning not to taste test, then called Wolfe from a payphone in the lobby. He hated my cell for what he called its nasal whine. Dr. Volmer confirms, I told him. Shellac blend, pigments, professional hand. Report in detail tomorrow. Pfui, he muttered. Tomorrow is a luxury. Has Saul reported? I hadn't heard from Saul, which meant Wolfe had already set the net wider. I returned to the brownstone where Saul was waiting in the front room with the look of a man who had chewed bad steak and was considering whether to order dessert. He nodded at me, then at Wolfe in the office. I followed Kreider, Saul said, voice as steady as his shoes. Belladonna Press. He had lunch with a man from Amphicote. They were friendly. Too friendly. The rep's name is Gideon Lark. Slick. Sales type. He laughed at every joke, even the ones Kreider didn't finish. Wolfe grunted. You heard specifics? Nothing direct, but Kreider mentioned Vale's spread campaign and made a gesture like tearing paper. Lark told him not to worry. The stuff would set in time. Then they clinked glasses. That was enough to light the fuse in Wolfe's head. He pressed his fingertips together and shut his eyes. When he opened them, he said, Archie, tomorrow morning you will contrive to meet Mr. Lark. Before that, you will revisit Miss Tuttle. She is withholding. I glanced at Saul, who gave the faintest shrug. What do you want me to squeeze? I asked. Nothing crude, Wolfe said. Merely place before her the consequences of concealment. She has introduced us to this affair. She's not a messenger only. She is entangled. Saul departed with his usual quiet exit, and I phoned Clara at her desk. She agreed to meet me at a cafe around the corner from Vale House. I found her at a back table nursing tea, the cherries on her hat still defying gravity. She looked less like a secretary and more like a woman cornered by the plot of her own novel. You didn't tell us everything, I said, sitting down. Wolfe wants it all on the record. Why you came to him and why you were afraid. Her hands trembled. She set the cup down before it spilled. I thought it was only warnings. But 3 nights ago, someone entered my apartment. Nothing was taken, nothing moved, except on my kitchen table was another jar, empty, clean, with a note inside. It read, You can't spread alone. That was the kind of omission Wolfe didn't forgive. I kept my tone level. Why hide that? Because Mr. Vale would blame me. He already thinks I'm hysterical. And because I thought, if I told you, you'd think I was involved. But I'm not. I'm the target. Whoever is doing this wants me scared. Wants me to deliver the fear. She pulled the folded note from her purse and handed it over. I slid it into an envelope. You just promoted yourself from witness to leaver, I said. Wolfe will know how to use it. As I left the cafe, I had the feeling of eyes on my back. The street was busy, and any tale would have blended. Still, when I returned to the brownstone and reported to Wolfe, he nodded like he'd been expecting it. She's being watched, he said. Of course. Whoever arranges metaphors wishes to measure their impact. Did you see the hand? No, but if they keep close, I will. He sighed and pressed the buzzer for beer. Fritz arrived with a tray. Wolfe poured himself a glass, then spoke as if dictating to history. We have 4 clear interests. Papier, finance, resentful of expense. Sloane, editorial, principled but powerless. Dane, author, volatile and vocal. Kreider, competitor, ambitious. All are capable of pettiness, but this is not petty. This is artifice. Gluing proofs, lacquering jam, infiltrating apartments. This is the work of someone who enjoys design. And Gideon Lark is our artisan. He drank, set the glass down, and closed his eyes again. Tomorrow we bait him. For tonight, Archie, see that Miss Tuttle returns home unmolested. Your company will deter. If not, your fists may. That was as close as Wolfe ever came to permission for violence. I collected my hat and coat and went back into the night, where Clara's shadow stretched longer than her steps, and the air smelled faintly, disturbingly, of something sweet. Clara lived in a narrow brick that had decided it would rather be respectable than charming. The stoop was clean, the mailbox dents were honest, and the lobby smelled faintly of lemon oil and last week's mail. We did the standard dance. I let her key the front door while I kept my back to the street, seeing what the glass would give me. The glass gave me a man who didn't like being given. He was across the way, turned 3/4, wearing a cap that had decided to be nondescript and succeeding. He had the posture of a lamp-post that resented electricity. Inside, I palmed the buzzer board, waited 10 Mississippis, then climbed. On the second landing, I detoured to the back stairs and went down soft. Outside again, I took 3 steps to the right and looked at him, using the window of the deli as my mirror. He was still there, head half tilted, as if listening to nothing in particular. When a bus exhaled in the lane, a draft carried a whiff to me. Sweet, thin, wrong. Not bakery sweet. Solvent sweet. I went back in before he could get the ideas I was inviting company. On Clara's floor, I checked the hole, the lock cylinder, the jamb. No fresh scrapes, no new putty. When she opened, I went in first and toured with my eyes. People who come home to find things untouched say it like a comfort. Sometimes it only means your intruder has taste. Nothing was overturned and nothing was missing. The kitchen table held a white bowl with 2 apples that had been coached to look like a magazine. The sink was dry. On the counter, though, a butter knife sat on a wooden board, and its shadow was wrong. I touched the knife with one finger and felt resistance. The blade was glued to the wood. Not much, just a crescent of tack along the steel. When I tried to lift it, it came up reluctantly, releasing a thin thread that snapped and left a shine like nail polish. Clara saw my face and put a hand to her mouth. "I didn't," she began. "You didn't," I said. "But he did." I pointed to the door. The jam edge wore a new gleam the width of a dime. Somebody had run a finger there with a daub of something. Not enough to stick the door, just enough to leave a signature if you knew what you were reading. I found the empty jar on top of the refrigerator where she'd left it, note inside as before. With a pencil, I lifted the slip and looked at the lettering again. The paste-ups respected spacing the way a typesetter does. The O's were all from the same font cut. The S's came from 2 different families, but aligned like cousins. Whoever was doing this didn't just have access to paper. They had affection for it. "Pack a bag," I told her. "You're sleeping at your sister's or at a hotel. You can pick which one makes you less miserable. You're not sleeping here." My sister is in Queens," she said. "It's late." "A hotel. Mr. Vale will." "Mr. Vale will pay," I said. "And if he doesn't, he'll discover what happens when his Sunday spreads run a picture of his secretary being harassed while he pinches pennies. Meanwhile, you'll give me anything here that looks like paper and arrived in the last 72 hours that you didn't order." She moved fast. Fear can be efficient when you give it an errand. She collected her mail, a delivery slip for a package she hadn't picked up, a glossy one-sheet for the launch window at Strand, and a handwritten card in a plain envelope with no return. The card was a thank-you note for nothing in particular, signed only with an ink blot shaped like a jellyfish. I slid it into an evidence sleeve I carry to make Wolfe feel I've been civilized. I called Wolfe from her kitchen. He hates the nasal whine of my cell. He tolerated it because he wanted every breath of the saboteur's perfume catalogued. I told him about the butter knife and the glue thread and the jellyfish blot. "Demonstrative," he said. "Our friend cannot resist annotation. Take Miss Tuttle to the Euston on 72nd. Quiet, unobtrusive. Return to her building and sit in your car for an hour. If a man enters, note him. If he lingers, note him more." "I have asked Saul to relieve you at 11. Your flowers forgive you?" I asked. "They do not," he said. and rang off. I got Clara settled with the kind of clerk who knows trouble when it asks for an inside room. I left her with instructions not to answer any knock, even if it came with a cheesecake. Then I went back to her street and took a seat behind the wheel of my coupe where I could see the stoop and the reflection in the deli glass without being a billboard. The man in the cap was gone. In his place, a white van with magnetic signage that read Amphi in blue, and then a tear where the rest of the letters had once been. It idled 2 doors down, then rolled on like a guilty conscience deciding to be late somewhere else. At 9:30, a couple fought their way up the stairs with a bicycle and too many opinions. At 10, a dog walker paused to let his charges evaluate the hydrant. At 10:15, a man I didn't like on sight came around the corner with his hands buried in his jacket, while the weather didn't require it. He had contractor boots too new for actual work and the nervous habit of checking the gutters for messages. He didn't go in. He loitered by the deli window, then pretended to be captured by a rack of tabloids. When he turned, I got his face in the glass. Narrow, unremarkable, hair that had been disciplined by a clipper and then excused from further service. When a woman came out with coffee, he took the door for her with elaborate care, as if to prove he was not the kind of man who could glue a butter knife to a cutting board. The sweet note hit again when he shifted. It wasn't strong. It was the kind of smell your memory files and your nose tries to ignore. He moved off when a police cruiser drifted by, and I got a partial plate when he crossed under the streetlight. I sent it to Saul with a thumbed message. Saul doesn't need full plates to find a car. He needs an excuse. He replied with a bare, "On it." At 10:55, Saul's headlights winked at me from the corner. We did the handoff you do when the job needs to keep breathing while you sleep, and I took the long way back to the brownstone because the short way felt watched. I parked in back and used the kitchen door. Fritz looked up from a bowl where he was coaxing butter into submission for tomorrow's pastry and gave me the tight nod that means we have mail. On Wolfe's office desk, blotter lay a manila envelope, unsealed but supervising its own privacy. The address label was pasted up from cut letters, tidy as ever, MRWOLFE. Inside was a single sheet of coated stock, the proof for a 2-page ad for the quiet ransom. Only this ad had a modification. The tagline, "Make it spread," had been neatly crossed out and replaced with "won't." The ink wasn't ink. A fingertip smear told me it was the same resin blend, thin this time, just enough to catch the light and the meaning. I called up to the plant rooms. Wolfe doesn't like to be summoned after 10 unless the world is ending or trying to rearrange itself in his house. He came down anyway, wearing the expression he reserves for people who mistake his chair for a public bench. "So," he said, taking the sheet from me by its corner, "they have found our mail slot." "Or our mail slot found them," I said. "It could have been dropped earlier." "Phew. Fritz checked after dinner. This is newer than my beer." He held the proof to the lamp and inhaled delicately. The same hand. The same thriftless cleverness. He is not content to threaten Mr. Vale. He must present himself to me as if asking for an ovation from the only audience he respects. "Lark," I said. "Possibly," he said. "Probably a man who loves materials. Mr. Lark sells them. He may also adore them. But he is not alone. The phrase, 'you can't spread alone,' is a confession. Our engineer has a sponsor or an editor." He put the sheet down and rang for beer. When Fritz arrived, Wolfe took half a glass and then stopped, as if remembering the world had insisted on being in his office. "Tomorrow, we will contrive to have Mr. Lark in this room," he said. "He will come because he believes himself immune to detection. Indeed, he will wish to see our faces." "We will oblige him. Archie, at 9 you will telephone Belladonna and ask for Mr. Kreider's assistant. You will say that an amphicoat proposal has arrived in error here and you require a forwarding address for Mr. Lark. Use the proof as bait. Meanwhile, Saul will identify your loiterer. I told him about the van and the partial plate and the butter knife with ambitions. He listened, eyes closed, fingers together, and when I finished, he opened them and said, "The Strand window dresses tomorrow at 3. Mr. Vale will want to attend his apotheosis. We will attend his humiliation if we are late. Let us be early." He dismissed me with a tilt of his head that meant bed would be forgiven if I took it immediately. I went up, but sleep stayed skeptical. Somewhere between the crack in the curtain and the clock's soft throat, Claire, I decided the man with the solvent suite was not paid to think. He was paid to stand and to watch, and maybe to dab a door jamb with a signature. The thinking was being done by someone who had loved the feel of a magazine page since childhood and had learned to weaponize it. At 7, Fritz found me already downstairs, half a cup into coffee. Wolfe appeared at 9 on schedule, as if schedules could compel events. He looked at the proof again, sniffed again, and said, "Call Mr. Kreider's office." Then, as I reached for the phone, he added, "And have Fritz fetch the jar from Dr. Vollmer at 11. I want it here when Mr. Lark arrives. If a man has curated a joke, he should be permitted to admire it just before it is explained to him." At 9 on the nose, I called Belladonna and asked for Denton Kreider's assistant. The young man who came on had the varnished cheer of someone who arranges other people's calendars for sport. "This is Archie Goodwin for Mr. Nero Wolfe," I said. "We've received an Amphicoat proposal by mistake. Wrong courier bin. We'd like to forward it to their representative. Gideon Lark." There was a pause you could have shelved a slim volume on. "Mr. Lark isn't resident here," he said carefully. "But I believe he can be reached." "Sure," I said, "or you can give me his address and I'll deliver the embarrassment personally." He settled for a phone number and a midtown office on a floor where things are sold with adjectives. I thanked him with just enough insouciance to suggest we hadn't noticed the slip that proved Lark and Kreider were more than lunch companions. Wolfe, listening with his eyes closed, nodded once. "Invite him," he said. I dialed Lark. He answered with a voice that had coached itself not to betray impatience with people who can't pronounce cure time. I told him the same fib with minor improvements and added that, as a courtesy to Mr. Kreider, we wanted to make sure a sample in our possession was returned without, my word, spillage. "Samples are precious," he said, amused, "and often misunderstood." "Where shall I present myself?" 35 West 35th, I said. "Noon." After I hung up, Saul rang in. Plate came back to a contractor pool. Van was leased yesterday to W. Kurtz for Amphicoat demo service. Your loiterer is Walter Kurtz, maintenance crew lead at Grafton Bixler. He gets paid union wages and something off the books for technical assists. Photos in your inbox. I opened the email and looked at a face that had learned to blend in until it didn't. The jaw, the haircut, the habit of sloping toward exits. It was my man at the deli. "He was outside Clara's place," I said. "Solvent perfume. Bad acting." "His supervisor of record is Ruth Gonzalez," Saul said. "Her badge was used when she was home with a sick kid." Kurtz also signed off on the purge the night finishing 2 hiccuped. "He's our hands. Whether he's our brain, not likely," I said. "He reads tabloids like they might explode." I relayed it to Wolfe. He accepted it as if it had walked in and seated itself. At 11, Fritz returned from Dr. Vollmer with a jar in a paper bag and an envelope I could tell by touch held a little science. Vollmer's note was preliminary. Shellac base cut with ethanol, plasticizer consistent with a rosin-modified ester, pigment load to simulate strawberry. "Not a hobby blend," he'd scrawled. "A coating mind showing off. If you need it disassembled, denatured alcohol and patience." Wolfe set the note aside without pleasure. "Fritz," he said, "we will require a 3rd chair." Noon arrived in a suit that was better than its occupant. Gideon Lark was lean the way salesmen get when they have lunch with their appetites and dinner with someone else's. His hair had been arranged to suggest he didn't fear wind. He shook my hand and let his fingers rest just long enough to assess callus. If he caught solvent on me, he pretended not to. On him there was citrus and the faint ghost of something sweet that had been scrubbed with diligence. He took in the office the way men take in a stage before they perform. The books, the globe, the orchid prints. Then Wolfe. He smiled like someone seeing a celebrity in a restaurant and deciding to be philosophical about being seated near the kitchen. "Mr. Wolfe," he said. "A pleasure. I'm told you have something of mine." "We have something of someone's," Wolfe said. "If it is yours, you will say so and justify your possession. If it is not, you will identify its origin with professional accuracy. You may sit." Locke sat and crossed one knee. "May I see the misdelivered proposal?" "Later," Wolfe said. "First, a demonstration." I took the bag from the safe and set the jar on the blotter like a relic. Locke leaned in. He didn't touch it. His eyes worked. He inhaled once, delicately, as if he had promised his lawyer he wouldn't. "That," he said, "is not a food. That is a joke." "You are expert in jokes?" Wolfe asked. "I am expert in coatings," he said, meeting Wolfe's gaze as if that were part of the demo. "Someone cut a shellac with alcohol and a plasticizer, pigmented to match a strawberry jam, and let it set in a closed jar to misbehave. The cure is imperfect by design. See the micro-crazing on the surface? If you jab a knife, you get a bend and a refusal. It's, pardon me, cute. You admire it," Wolfe said. "As an exercise," Locke said. "As a professional communication, it fails. You could accomplish the same symbolism with a waterborne UV gel and avoid the smell." "Which smell?" Wolfe inquired. And I gave him a private point for the way he said it, almost bored. Locke grinned. "Ethanol. It's faint but clings. Your office is large, Mr. Wolfe, but your jar is louder than you think." "You see too much," Wolfe murmured. "And say more than is prudent." He closed his eyes, then opened them. "You lunched yesterday with Mr. Kreider of Belladonna. You discussed Mr. Vale's spread campaign. Tell me why Locke didn't flinch. He arranged surprise like lace. Belladonna is a client. They asked whether a competitor might be using our products in ways that could reflect unfavorably on the industry. I said I would never endorse unprofessional use and suggested that if they had concerns, they speak to their counsel. And then, I said, you clinked glasses and told him the stuff would set in time. He turned to me. I'm afraid your ears are better than your quotations. I said a great many things. Set in time is a phrase that follows me around because it's a pun. Editors enjoy puns. They do, Wolfe said. So do engineers who fancy themselves editors. His fingers came together. Mr. Locke, a maintenance lead named Walter Kurtz, leased an amphicoat van last night. He stood outside a woman's apartment who had the misfortune to be secretary to Mr. Vale and the temerity to bring me this jar. He bears the odor you so correctly identify. He is your creature or your colleague. Which? Locke's smile retreated to a bunker but didn't leave the field. We manage a contractor pool. Mr. Kurtz is approved to service lines that use our catalysts. Where he stands in his leisure is his affair. If he stood outside a woman's apartment, he should be spoken to. I'll speak to him. You will not, Wolfe said, as mild as a prayer. You will sit. You have been invited here to attend an explanation. You will return at 7 this evening with Mr. Kreider. I will also invite Mr. Vale, Ms. Sloane, Mr. Pape, Miss Dane, Mr. Kegel, and Mr. Kurtz. I will say what needs saying once and not in installments. Locke laughed softly. An office gathering. The famous theater. He spread his hands. Very well. I do love a demonstration. The phone rang. Fritz answered and passed it to me with a face that said the world had remembered we exist. It was the Euston. A bouquet had arrived for Miss Tuttle with a card and a small jar attached by ribbon. Housekeeping had noticed the ribbon was tacky to the touch and had not sent it up. Instructions. The IT clerk asked. "Keep it in the manager's office and don't open anything," I said. "A colleague will collect it. His name is Saul Panzer." I texted Saul the pickup and the warning and added, "If anyone asks for it first, take their hand off gently." Wolfe had watched my side of the call like a man timing a soft-boiled egg. When I hung up, he nodded. Our correspondent cannot resist encores. "Mr. Lark," he said without shifting his gaze, "if you intend to reach for your phone to warn a subordinate, do not." Lark's hands stayed visible and fond of his own knees. "I intend to watch," he said. "This is the most interesting sales call I've had all week." "Pfui," Wolfe said softly. "You are not selling. You are auditioning for absolution." He lifted the jar again, looked at it with distaste, and put it down. 7 o'clock, he repeated. "If you fail to appear, I will find means to make your absence eloquent." Lark rose. He had the grace to look curious. "I'll be here," he said. "I should hate to miss the moment when a metaphor is arrested." After he left, Wolfe exhaled as if a room had gotten smaller and then forgiven him for it. He didn't look at me. He looked at the ad proof on the side table with its smeared correction and at the orchids beyond. "Archie," he said, "telephone Mr. Vale and Mrs. Sloane. Be explicit. Then go to Strand at 2:30 and stand where you can see without being seen. If our playwright intends an overture, he will choose a window." "And if he chooses a Sunday spread?" I asked. "He will not," Wolfe said. "He wants to watch their faces." And so, alas. At 2:30, I was at the Strand, doing my best impression of a man in no hurry to buy a book. The big window on Broadway was already dressed for Horace Vale's coronation. A towering stack of the Quiet Ransom rose like a paper obelisk, its jacket glistening under the lights, flanked by placards with the slogan, "Make it spread." In type you could read from the curb. A ladder leaned inside where 2 clerks were finishing the trim. Banners, colored gels, the usual theater. Vale himself was there in a camel coat again, as if afraid someone might mistake him for a citizen. He supervised with the satisfaction of a man arranging his own portrait. Lydia Sloane was there too, notes in hand, while Eldon Pepe lurked off to the side looking like he'd rather be counting receipts than banners. I held a position by the magazine racks, where I could see the window and the street both. The traffic moved without romance, honking when appropriate. At 2:50, Vera Dane strode up, uninvited but not unexpected. She stopped dead in front of the glass, arms folded, watching as if they'd just unveiled her gravestone. Her lips moved, and though I couldn't hear, I'd bet adjectives were involved. What mattered was who else arrived. A white van, unremarkable except for the faint scrape where a magnetic sign had been peeled, rolled into a hydrant spot across the street. The driver wore a cap low and sat too still. I knew that slope of shoulders. Kurtz again. He didn't get out. He watched. Inside the window, the clerks peeled protective film from the placards. For a moment, nothing. Then one of them frowned, touched the surface, and jerked his hand back. He called to the other. Together, they tried to lift the banner free, but it wouldn't. A smear gleamed under the light. A resin coat, thin but definite, tacky enough to hold the slogan, "Prisoner." "Make it spread," frozen under a film that wouldn't let it shine. The clerk cursed. I could read his mouth. Lydia stepped closer, saw it, and went pale. Vale stormed over, barked orders, demanded solvent. One placard ruined, the other starting to show the same shine. The obelisk of books was untouched, but the launch spectacle had been marred. The metaphor was perfect, his spread sealed. I stepped outside, crossed the street, and leaned into the driver's window of the van before Kurtz could pretend to yawn. His eyes widened, then narrowed into the dull defiance of a hired man caught with wet hands. The sweet note of solvent floated out around him like an oar. "Afternoon, Wally," I said. "Enjoying the view?" He shrugged, waiting for a friend. "Sure. Same friend who told you to glue knives to cutting boards and door jambs to thresholds?" His jaw worked, but no words came out. The silence was a confession. I took down the plate in full and told him pleasantly to stay put until he was called for rehearsal. Then I went back across and found Lydia, who had stepped outside, flustered but steady. "Go back in," I told her. "Wolfe wants everyone at his office by 7. Tell Vale, tell Pape, tell Vera too, since she's already auditioning for Cassandra." "What do I say about this?" she asked, nodding at the window. "Say it's being preserved," I said. "Which it is. Saul's on his way with a camera. By the time Vale finishes yelling, the photographs will prove he wasn't merely hallucinating." She nodded and slipped back inside. I rang Wolfe. His voice was ironed flat. I told him about the placards, the resin film, and Kurtz in the van. "As I anticipated," he said. "The man cannot resist performance. You will return here now. Bring Mr. Kurtz if he proves portable." When I glanced back at the van, it was empty. Kurtz had slipped out during my call. The driver's seat smelled of solvent, the door latch bore a tacky smear, and the rear bay was clean except for a box of rags stiff with resin. He was gone into the crowd, and I wasn't inclined to stage a chase that would end in a pileup. Saul arrived in time to curse mildly, then took his photos of the glued slogans. We left it at that. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in his chair, beer at hand, the jar glowering from the safe like a guest that wouldn't leave. I reported clean, though Kurtz's disappearance tasted sour. Wolfe listened, eyes shut, lips compressed. "At 7, he said finally, "we shall have them all here. Mr. Vale, Ms. Sloane, Mr. Pape, Ms. Dane, Mr. Kegel, Mr. Kreider, Mr. Lark, and Mr. Kurtz, if he has wit enough to attend. Miss Tuttle as well, for she is our chosen witness. The matter has reached the point where one must say what one knows and endure the consequences." "You're sure Kurtz will come?" I asked. "He is a subordinate," Wolfe said. "He will come if ordered. Mr. Lark will order him, and Mr. Lark will come because he wishes to taste the applause he believes he has earned." I left him to his orchids and went upstairs to change into something a shade less rumpled. When I came down, Fritz was already arranging the chairs. 3 rows, semicircle, facing Wolfe's desk like pews in a private chapel. The jar sat in the center of the blotter. The proof ad with its smeared slogan was propped beside it. Vollmer's chemical report waited under a paperweight. Wolfe had set his stage. At 6:30, the doorbell began its evening work. Vale first, red-faced but determined to look victorious. Lydia behind him, crisp despite the ordeal. Pape with his shoulders hunched like he wanted to return to his balance sheets. Vera swept in with a snort, tossing her braid like punctuation. Kreider arrived with a half-smile that suggested he'd rehearsed his lines. Lark came at his shoulder, eyes bright with anticipation, and behind them, reluctant, Kurtz, cap in hand, looking like a schoolboy, marched to the principal. Kegel arrived last, union pin gleaming, voice already warmed for argument. Clara Tuttle slipped in quietly, pale but steady, and took the chair closest to the wall. Wolfe surveyed them without rising. His eyes were half-lidded, his hands folded. "You are here because metaphors have become intolerable," he said. "You have seen them, books sealed, placards coated, jam that would not spread. You are the circle within which these metaphors have meaning. Tonight you will hear who made them and why. If you are innocent, you will leave with your dignity. If you are not, you will leave with exposure." I ask for silence until I have finished. Mr. Goodwin will provide whatever corroboration is necessary. The room settled, the shuffle of shoes the only sound. Lark leaned back, smiling faintly. Vera leaned forward, spoiling for combat. Vale glared at everyone at once. The jar glistened under the lamp, mute but eloquent. Wolfe drew a breath, and the stage was his. Wolfe didn't rush it. He let the room settle the way he lets a sauce reduce, slowly, until what's left is potent enough to do damage. When his eyes opened, they were fixed not on Vale, who wanted them, but on the jar. "Consider," he said, as if we were all his sous chefs and the recipe was printed in the air. A sequence of impediments, a proof with its foredge sealed, placards coated so their slogan could not shine, a hotel, bouquet ribbon rendered tacky, a kitchen knife that would not lift, a door jamb that tried to keep a door, and this jam that will not spread. A single obsession expressed in several media by a single mind that enjoys materials and performance. Vera snorted. Vale aimed his glare at her and missed. Lark's smile stayed on, thinner. "The acts required two kinds of access," Wolfe went on. "First, the plant, to touch finishing and purge a nozzle. Second, your house, Mr. Vale, to touch proofs, schedules, and people. One actor supplied the hands and solvents, a line maintenance lead who leases vans and stands where he is told. Mr. Kurtz." All eyes went to Kurtz, who turned the color of newsprint and stared at the rug. Vale barked, "Arrest him!" at no one in particular. Wolfe's palm rose a half-inch. "Mr. Kurtz," he said, "you may say nothing and be fetched later by the police at my convenience. Or you may say what you did and for whom, and I will see that your part is weighed for what it was. Execution, not creation." Choose Kurtz's cap suffered under his hands. He kept his eyes on the rug. "I purged a nozzle," he muttered. "I dabbed some placards. I took a van." "That's it. And the apartment?" I asked. "The deli window?" "The door jamb." He swallowed. "I watched. I left no harm, a smidge of resin to say hello." "Hello," Vera said dryly. "In your charming dialect must mean sleep with your lights on." Wolfe ignored her. His gaze turned to Lark as if by tides. The mind, then. The artisan who chose shellac and plasticizer, who enjoys punning about cure and set, who lunches with a competitor and calls this cute. "Mr. Lark, stand up." Lark didn't. He crossed his ankle over his knee, lawyer casual. "I'll answer any proper question, Mr. Wolfe. But I won't rehearse your flattery." "Pfui," Wolfe said, so soft it stroked. "You supplied the blend. You directed the purge and the placards, and you could not resist composing a private performance for Miss Tuttle because audiences are your opiate. But you are not the sponsor. You sell catalyzed mischief. You do not decide where to pour it." Kreider's half-smile widened, which was a poor choice for a man who had lunched with the artisan. Wolfe's head tilted a fraction. "Mr. Kreider," he said, "your presence at that luncheon was stupid or brazen. You wanted Mr. Vale's launch to stumble. If your rival's spread could be made not to spread, the market would enjoy the irony and your list would breathe freer. You put money and appetite on the table, but you still lack one ingredient." Kreider's voice took the silky path. "Which is?" "Calendar," Wolfe said. "Exact knowledge of when a nozzle purge would escape QA, of when Strand would dress a window, of where a secretary lives, of what slogan would run in which banner on what stock. You can steal some of it by gossip, but not all, and not with the precision of today's little overture. For that, you needed a conduit within Vale House who loathes the spend, worships control, and keeps the timetables." Mr. Pape's head jerked like a hooked trout. "That's absurd," he said, glasses frosting. "I manage budgets." "I don't dab glue on signs." "Exactly," Wolfe said. "You don't soil your hands. You buy people who will. You argued the campaign was profligate. You stood to win if it failed. Your charts would be vindicated, and Mr. Vale's appetite curtailed. You handle vendor files, you approve plant invoices, you know who the union reps are on which night and where grievances pinch. You fed Mr. Lark what he needed and enjoyed the prospect of saving money by wasting gifts. Pape's mouth opened, closed. Lydia turned to look at him with a calm that wasn't friendly. Vale emitted something between a laugh and a cough. "This is slander," Pape said. "You will be sued." "Not by you," Wolfe replied. "You will be busy." Mr. Goodwin, the logs I handed him, the printed badge taps, and the lease slips Saul had emailed. Wolfe didn't glance at them. He had memorized. At 22:42 last Friday, a purge on finishing 2 was logged under supervisor credentials belonging to Ms. Gonzalez while she was home. The line recovered in 8 minutes. A perfect interval to lay a translucent layer on 4 edges bound for QA, thin enough to evade, thick enough to cling. A contractor badge, Amphi 42, entered the cage without a work order. Yesterday, a van leased in Mr. Kurtz's name idled outside Miss Tutnell's, and today a placard at Strand wore a very light coat. The resin is not shop generic. Dr. Vollmer will testify it is rosin-modified shellac, cut to mimic jam's mouthfeel. Mr. Lark identified it in this room without touching it. Lark's grin was back, defiant. "And if I recognize a prank, that convicts me of inventing it?" "It convicts you of proximity," Wolfe said. "What convicts you is appetite." He reached to the side table and lifted the ad proof we'd received, its corrected slogan gleaming faintly. "You mailed this to me, Mr. Lark, because you want the cleverness seen by a judge of cleverness. No one else here would risk intruding on my premises, except a man who believes himself untouchable and pines for applause." Lark's eyes flicked, quick at Kurtz, at Kreider, then back. "You can't prove the envelope." Saul saved me the trouble of being theatrical by stepping in from the hall with another paper bag. He'd been waiting for his cue like a pro. I took the bag and set it on the blotter. Inside was the bouquet card and the small jar housekeeping had quarantined, ribbon still tacky. Saul had brought tongs. His habits are civilized. Wolfe didn't touch the ribbon. He looked at the card. The paste-ups were as tidy as ever. "You can't spread alone," Wolfe read aloud. "True." Mr. Lark didn't. "Mr. Pape, your emails to Mr. Kreider from a private account." Saul. Saul handed over prints. Pape lunged to grab them, thought better, and sat hard. Kreider shifted but kept his smile. The emails were the sort 2 careful men think are clever, all innuendo and shared jokes about bread and knives and weekends. Enough for any prosecutor to claim conspiracy, enough for any jury to enjoy. Vale made a sound like triumph, strangling on an olive. "You rotten." "Sit," Wolfe said, and Vale, to his own amazement, did. Cagle cleared his throat. "If you intend to paint the union into this, I do not," Wolfe said without looking at him. "Mr. Cagle, your grievances are loud, but topical. Your steward's presence on the floor gave cover to the purge because Mr. Pape knew they would provide it. The union is a curtain he borrowed, not a partner who danced." Lydia spoke for the first time. "He mailed me at home," she said slowly, eyes on paper. "The note. Seal them." That wasn't a stranger. That was someone who knew the edges of what we do and wanted me to see failure as inevitable. Pape's composure cracked. "I didn't tell anyone to glue books," he said, fierce and small at once. "I asked for restraint. I told Gideon to suggest alternatives. Not sabotage." Kreider's voice came in silk again. "Gideon, if you are engaged in independent experimentation, I'll expect your resignation in the morning." Lark laughed once, the wrong way. "You bought it, and now you don't like the label," he said. "You wanted a stumble you could call fate. You sent me to a man whose religion is efficiency. He didn't pay to break anything. He paid to watch the math when Wolfe's fingers pressed together. "Enough," he said. "Mr. Vale, I will telephone Inspector Kramer when we are finished." He will come with Sergeant Stebbins and take Mr. Pape, Mr. Lark, and Mr. Kurtz. Mr. Kreider, he will speak to you at your convenience, which may prove inconvenient. Mrs. Sloane, you will prepare a statement that acknowledges a sabotage attempt, thanks Strand for its prompt assistance, and declines to waste adjectives on malice. Mr. Kegel, you will remind your members that grievance is not theatre. He reached for his bear, then left it untouched. As for motive, thrift, vanity, rivalry, and the peculiar complacency of clever men who believe they can curate outcomes the way they curate gloss. You cannot. He turned his head a fraction toward Clara. And you, Miss Tuttle, will stop blaming yourself for carrying jars. You did not spread this. Silence held a breath. Then Vale stood and, for once, didn't speak. Lydia's glance at him suggested the rest of his words should be saved for a lawyer. Kurtz's cap twisted. Lark's smile finally went out. Pape looked at the floor and found no numbers there to comfort him. Wolfe leaned back, eyes closing, verdict rendered. Archie, he said. Kramer. I dialed Kramer and told him he could bring the cigar this time. The show had curtains. He arrived with Stebbins in tow in the amount of time it takes a man to get annoyed on purpose. The office inhaled his tobacco like an old habit and exhaled patience. He looked at the semicircle, the jar on the blotter, the proof with its shy gleam, and then at Wolfe as if counting how many times in a career one has to admit the chair beat you to the punch. If this is another metaphor party, he said, I should have brought a professor. It is a crime, Wolfe said, with metaphors as its costume. Sit Kramer half sat, half braced his fists on his knees. I handed him the stack. Grafton Bixler logs with the 2242 purge, the lease form for the van in Kurtz's name. Vollmer's prelim on the resin blend, Saul's photos of the Strand placards, and the tidy prints of Pape's private emails to Kreider with their wisecracks about bread and knives and weekends. Saul positioned himself against the bookcase where he always becomes structural. Kramer turned pages and grunted like a man negotiating with his appetite. This gets me criminal mischief and trespass at least, he said. Maybe conspiracy if the DA isn't having a delicate day. Who's my hands? Kurtz didn't look up. Wally Kurtz, I said. Plant maintenance. Leased the van. Watched Miss Tuttle's building. Dabbed a placard at Strand and got the nozzle purge to lay a thin coat on four edges. Kramer eyed Kurtz the way men eye eels in barrels. Congratulations, he said. You sabotaged a book about ransom and you'll need one. He thumbed to the emails. And money. Eldon Pape, finance. Denton Kreider, rival. Gideon Lark, coatings. That about it. Plus an urge to be applauded, Wolfe said. Mr. Lark composed the jam demonstration and mailed me that proof because mischief wants an audience. Lark cleared his throat carefully. Inspector, I recognize materials because it is my job. I did not mail anything to this address. Kramer sniffed the envelope Saul had bagged, the one that had smuggled in the proof. Smells like a bar and a bakery had a kid, he said. We'll see what lab enjoys. If we pull resin traces that match Dr. Vollmer's mix off your office, your car, or your cuffs, you'll get your audience. Kreider stood as if he had a tea time. I'll go voluntarily to my counsel, he announced. I'm not being arrested in another man's parlor. Stebbins stepped into his shadow. You'll go where the inspector points, he said, almost cheerful. If it's counsel first, it's because he wants to collect the fee before you spend it on cologne. Pape found his voice and gave it resolve. This is insane. I sent no one to ruin anything. I told a vendor the budget was out of control. If Mr. Vale's excesses met gravity, that's economics. Economics doesn't glue four edges, I said. And your private email to Mr. Kreider about the window dressing that won't was written 2 hours before Strand started theirs. If that's clairvoyance, sell it. He flinched and the fight went out of him the way light leaves a room when someone remembers the switch. Lydia watched him without commentary. Kegel lifted a hand like a witness who enjoys the sound of oath-taking. "If this stains my people," he began, but Wolfe didn't open his eyes. "It will not," he said. Their presence on the floor provided cover. Their hands did not. "If you wish a statement, make it after Mr. Kramer issues his. Loud if you must, accurate if you can." Clara sat tight, clutching her bag. Vale looked from paper to paper, searching for a line where he won. When he found none, he tried dignity. "Inspector," he said, "I want every charge you can contrive." Kramer gave him a glance that wasn't a compliment. "You'll get what the law affords," he said, "and you'll hold off the press until I've got them through booking. If some editor with adjectives burns my case before arraignment, I'll find creative uses for the word obstruction." Vale swallowed a speech and nodded like a man who has traded theater for survival. Kramer shut the folder and stood. "All right," he said to Stebbins. "Kurtz, Lark, Papé, Kreider, come say your lines downtown. If counsel wants to meet you there, I'm no ogre. Miss Sloane, I'll take statements about the notes in the window. Dr. Vollmer can send lab to our people. I assume you'll share." He looked at Wolfe, who dipped his chin an inch, which is his way of co-signing civilization. Lark looked genuinely curious as Stebbins eased him up. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, "if I had used a UV gel instead of shellac, would you have applauded?" "No," Wolfe said. "I do not applaud vandalism. I acknowledge craft. If that distinction is lost on you, it explains your predicament." Kurtz went quietly, cap crushed. Papé protested to the door, then remembered breath has value and folded it. Kreider maintained a smile that was waiting for new employment. When the lock caught the last of them, the room achieved a pressure I like. The kind that means you can hear forks upstairs. Kramer stayed to light the cigar he'd been forbidding himself. He didn't smoke it. He let it burn in his fist like an arrested fuse. "I'll need affidavits," he said. "Vollmer on chemistry, Manwaring on logs. The plants union will want to sing, but it's not their melody. If any of your butterflies decide to fly before I pin them, I'll be back." "You will be back regardless," Wolfe said. "The newspapers will be immoderate. Mr. Vale will attempt to exploit his victimhood. Mr. Kreider will attempt to sell his. The district attorney will wish to be seen making an example. But the fact is simple. This was a temper tantrum with tools." Kramer grunted. "You do love a line." "All right. Goodwin, walk me out before I decide I like your carpet." At the door he paused, looked at Clara, and his voice took on the rasp he uses when he remembers humans. "Miss, if anybody bothers you again, call me or him." He jerked his chin at me. "And don't open jars from strangers." She managed a thank you that had color in it. I walked Kramer to the stoop. The night had the cool that says city and not stars. He tucked the cigar into a pocket to save it from himself. "You get paid for this one?" he asked. "If Vale pays," I said, "it'll be because he can't afford not to." "Figures," he said, then added, almost kindly, "Your boy upstairs, he ever get tired of being right?" "He gets tired of being interrupted," I said. When I returned, the chairs had been shifted 3 inches closer to where they belonged, and Fritz had recovered the room's dignity with a whisk broom none of the culprits could have handled. Wolfe sat with his eyes closed again and his lips not quite forgiving. The jar had gone back into the safe. The ad proof with its sticky correction lay where he could ignore it. "Dinner in 20, Fritz announced from the door, which for him was a proposal and a promise. Clara approached Wolfe's desk as if she'd discovered a custom of the country and meant to obey it. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, thank you. I don't know what happens to me now at work." "You will resign," Wolfe said without opening his eyes. She made a small sound. "You will resign tomorrow at 10, he continued. "You will do so courteously, without commentary. You You will then accept Miss Sloane's offer." Lydia, who had not yet made one, smiled with a swiftness that answered 3 questions. "I'll call you in the morning," she told Clara. Brunch and a contract. No slogans. Clara's shoulders lost a weight I could feel from across the rug. "All right," she said. "Brunch I can spread." "Fey," Wolfe said, but it lacked acid. He opened his eyes and regarded the room, now almost itself again. "Archie," he said, "the retainer from Mr. Vale. 2,000. If he declines, inform him that Miss Sloane will be glad to supply a list of outlets that will enjoy the story of his thrift." "I'll write him an invoice with adjectives," I said. "Spare me," he said. He leaned back, arranged his bulk as if forgiving gravity for another day, and let the silence settle. When dinner came, consommé, then veal with morels that made a stronger case for civilization than anything we had done, I ate and watched Wolfe's face slacken by degrees back to something like neutral. After coffee, Lydia took Clara away in a cab. Vale didn't return, and the night achieved the brownstone's favorite temperature, the one where nothing asked to be explained. I cleared my notebook. Wolfe refilled his beer and didn't drink it. When he finally spoke, it was to the room, not to me. "People think the sin is malice," he said, as if concluding a conversation that had been waiting for him. "Often the sin is vanity with a budget." I let that hang. It would make a good last line, but the night wasn't done, and neither was he. He reached for the bell for Fritz, then didn't press it. "Tomorrow," he said, "we will send the jar back to Dr. Vollmer. I will not have it here." "The smell offends. Consider it done," I said. "And after that?" "After that," he murmured, "we will eat breakfast as designed." He closed his eyes again. The orchids upstairs were at rest. The brownstone, for the first time since a woman had arrived with a parcel and a request, remembered its own peace. Breakfast the next morning behaved itself. Fritz's brioche arrived warm, the coffee was the right kind of mean, and Wolfe confined his comments to the obtuseness of a certain saucer. The jar was no longer in the safe. Fritz had marched it back to Dr. Vollmer at 8, with my blessing and a towel. The office smelled like books and beeswax instead of a distillery that had taken up pastry arts. The papers did their best to be coy. Kramer had sat on details, but coyness has a short shelf life when a campaign slogan writes the jokes for you. A tabloid tried "spread thin," another went with "thick as thieves." Strand's manager sent a tidy note. The placards had been salvaged, the window was redressed, and they appreciated our prompt intervention, which meant Saul's photographs had managed to look like prudence instead of scandal. Lydia's statement ran on 2 outlets by 10. Calm, grateful, free of adjectives that invite lawyers. Saul checked in from the courthouse steps. Kurtz had discovered the comparative mercy of surrender and was composing a narrative that put his fingerprints on the tools and his brain in storage. Lark had gone procedural, asking for counsel between every 3rd syllable. Kreider's attorney wore a suit that advertised endurance. Pape's mouth had run out of ways to deny math. The DA would file criminal mischief, conspiracy, and trespass. How many stuck would depend on how gracefully each gentleman learned to point. At 9:30, Dr. Vollmer sent the final hymn sheet. Shellac base, denatured alcohol, rosin-modified ester plasticizer, carmine substitute, glycerin to toy with tack, and trace stabilizers that matched Amphicote's catalog like a monogram. He added a line only a man who liked his work would add. Choice of Rosin has signature impurities consistent with a single vendor lot. See attached spectrum. I printed it and placed it where Kramer would notice it without knocking over his cigar. Vale called at 10 in a voice that had taught itself contrition overnight and was still learning the vowels. He thanked Wolfe for containing a situation as if we were a lid, and asked for recommendations on crisis communications as if Wolfe were a faucet. Wolfe told him to authorize Ms. Ms. Sloane's statement and keep his mouth shut, in that order. When Vale began to discuss the price of counsel against Crider, Wolfe cut him off, named the retainer, and added a small surcharge for the intrusion on breakfast. Vale paid. Money makes certain arguments eloquent. At 11, the doorbell produced Lydia and Clara in tandem, both with the air of people who had endured a morning of human resources and survived with their humor intact. Clara had resigned at 10 on the dot. Pepe had been placed on leave pending investigation and discovery of his spine. Lydia had offered a contract with another house's imprint for Clara's organizational talents, which is publishing's way of admitting someone kept it from drowning. It came with a salary that didn't rely on slogans to feel real. Clara carried a small parcel. She put it on the blotter and peeled back the paper. A jar again, red checkered lid, ruby inside. For a second, Wolfe's mouth compressed. Then she held up both hands fast. "From Pasticceria Mele," she said. "Fritz recommended." I asked them to show me the kitchen Fritz, hovering with the kind of idol that's never idle. Nodded once. I telephoned. They do not permit gentlemen with solvents. He took the jar like a midwife and fetched toast. Wolfe watched as if the world were being tested, and perhaps it was. Fritz spread, the knife moved, the jam obeyed. Wolfe took a bite, closed his eyes, and allowed civilization to proceed. "You will forgive the symbol," Clara said, color high. "I thought we deserved to retire it properly." Wolfe made a sound that might, in a more demonstrative man, have been approval. "Symbols are tolerable," he said, "when their referents behave." Lydia's smile was crooked and earned. "The referents at Vale House are being deglazed," she said. "We'll manage." "Thank you for not letting the city watch us slip." "It was never about you," Wolfe said. "It was about appetites that confuse the enforcement of limits with power. Mr. Pape wished to teach Mr. Vale restraint by vandalizing it. Mr. Crider wished to buy advantage by purchasing accident. Mr. Locke wished to be admired for treating a tool as a wit. All three are common, all three are stupid." Clara laughed softly, surprised at the sound coming out of her in daylight. "And me?" "You were used," Wolfe said. "You declined to enjoy it." "Few do. You will be fine." They left to find a reasonable brunch and perhaps a future that didn't leave glue on the door jamb. The brownstone exhaled again. I sat with my coffee and let the quiet do what it does best. At noon, Kramer called. He wanted Volmer's spectrum and the lease paperwork. I told him they were waiting. He grunted gratitude that he'd deny later and hung up to go be photographed by men who think cigars are props. By 2, the street had retired from its fascination with us, which is my favorite mood for it. I did the errands that keep a business from turning into nostalgia. Invoicing, a note to Saul, authorized for his extra legwork, and a memo to myself to send Fritz flowers for tolerating jars in the kitchen. Wolfe went up to the plant rooms and stayed an extra 20 minutes, which is his way of admitting he'd allowed himself to be pleased. When he came down, he was carrying none of it, just his bulk and an expression that suggested the world's clamor had faded to its appropriate volume. He took his chair, closed his eyes, and spoke as if dictating to the part of the room that collects maxims. "People prate about control," he said. "They imagine that if they harden what others should enjoy, words, music, food, they have mastered them. Control is never that. It is choice, the ability to refrain. A varnished page is not discipline. It is infantile mischief with a budget. A manager who engineers failure to prove thrift is a parasite on success. A rival who buys sabotage has confessed incompetence. I regret none of them. I regret only the labor wasted removing their thumbprints. Kramer will remove some," I said. "The rest, time and janitors." He peered at me. "And you?" "I'll avoid jam in unlabeled jars," I said. "And if anyone invites me to a window dressing, I'll bring gloves." "Pfui," he said, but it was decorative. Fritz will make a shortcake for dessert. We will honor Miss Tuttle's symbolism properly. We did. Dinner that night ended with strawberries on biscuit and what Fritz called a chantilly that could have made a trucker weep. Wolfe regarded the plate as if a treaty had been signed. After coffee, the phone offered a last amuse-bouche. Saul reporting that Kurtz had given up a string of texts from a number registered to an LLC whose owner of record rhymed with Kreider, and that Lark had posted a line to a private forum the week before. Sometimes you have to show a page how not to turn. Men like that can't help writing their own indictments. The DA would eat well. I put away the notebooks and let the house reclaim its usual noises, the distant hum of pipes, the civilized conspiracy between rugs and shoes, the orchids breathing their quiet up the stairs. Fritz cleaned a last glass. The kitchen door sighed shut. Wolfe reached for his beer, changed his mind, and folded his hands as if appetites could be told when. "So," he said, not opening his eyes. "Breakfast as designed tomorrow." "No bells." "If the doorbell rings," I said, "we'll make them sign a pledge about pectin." He didn't smile. He allowed my existence. "Your wit," he murmured, "is like jam. It is tolerable when spread thin." "Then it's lucky," I said, turning off the lamp by the couch, "that we're fresh out of shellac." The brownstone resumed its default setting, which is peace with sauce. Outside, the city rehearsed the next clamor. Inside, the air remembered strawberries, but only just enough to make a point. The brownstone was quiet in the way a house gets when it's shaken off a visitor's perfume. Fritz had retired, the kitchen as neat as a ledger. Wolfe sat heavy in his chair, fingers laced across the rise of his vest, eyes half closed as though he might consent to sleep if the world promised not to meddle again. I'd closed my notebook, but he wasn't done, and I knew better than to get comfortable before he delivered his coda. "Kramer will untangle the legal threads," he said at last, his voice as measured as the tick of the clock. "Lark will preen until he's trimmed. Kreider will feign ignorance until counsel explains the price. Pepe will sputter about economics until numbers fail him. And Kurtz, poor, simple Kurtz, will barter obedience for leniency. It is all banal." His eyes opened, catching the lamplight. "What remains is the lesson." I waited, because Wolfe likes his stage cues observed. "They sought to make a conceit of restraint," he went on, "to demonstrate that words, unlike jam, could be prevented from spreading. They mistook sabotage for wit. It is the defect of clever men who believe their pranks to be philosophy. They did not discipline language, they vandalized it, and the punishment will not be moral clarity. It will be court calendars and boredom." I leaned back. "You make it sound like boredom's the greater punishment." "For such men," Wolfe said, "it is. They crave attention, to be ignored, to be processed by systems indifferent to their cleverness. That will gall more than any prison cot." He closed his eyes again, dismissing them as if their relevance had expired. There was only the hum of the city outside, the muffled traffic, the occasional horn. Inside, the orchids upstairs perfumed the silence. The jar was gone, the slogans reclaimed, and breakfast promised to be what it ought. Civilized, untouched by metaphors with glue. I looked at him, comfortable in his chair, and thought how cases always end here. Not with applause, not with fireworks, but with Wolfe putting humanity back in its box, tied up with a maxim that no one asked for and everyone remembers. "Anyway," I said, standing, "tomorrow's toast will spread." His lips twitched, just barely. "See that it does, Archie." And with that, the case of the jam that wouldn't spread closed itself, not with a bang, but with the brownstone returning to the order Wolfe insists on, where crimes are dissected, fools are unmasked, and dinner without interruption is always served, 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 is always served.